Let's destroy some John Stossel anti-tariff talking points, shall we? I like John Stossel, but these guys are, I don't know if I like, they're so anti-tariff. It's mind-boggling, actually. I'm like, dude, come on, Stossel. Just you gotta do better than this. You gotta do better than this, because it's kind of like, the more I catch you in these misinformation, I don't know what else to say it, the more I'm like, what? All right, so it's frustrating because I like John Stossel, a big fan of Stossel. He stood up against the climate change Nazis for many, many years. He's been for freedom. This one right here, it irks me to no end, because the more you look into the tariff history, the more you realize these guys either A, are just completely ignorant. And I think they probably are, frankly. They just don't know what the history of the tariffs were. Or the more you realize that they're lying. I don't think Stossel's a liar, so I think he's ignorant. But we're still going to destroy his thing here. 3 myths about tariffs. All right. One small business owner said, "If this is the end of my American dream, I'm going to go down swinging," says one business owner. So we're going to read this right quick. Last month, President Trump proudly announced Liberation Day, the day American industry is reborn. Reborn because of his tariffs, which he called the most beautiful word in the dictionary. Stossel said this is just wrong. The first time Trump was president, he raised tariffs on steel. That helped American steel makers. They hired 1,000 more workers. But in the end, we lost 75,000 jobs, says Stossel. Really? We lost 75,000 jobs? Why? So let's take a look at what this link is, shall we? Yes, we shall. We're going to look at what this says here. Oh, and we're going to go to EconoFact, because facts still matter. So according to EconoFact, who says facts still matters, they're going to give us factual data, will they not? Let's take a look. It's been nearly 2 years since the Trump administration first imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum. New data and research are beginning to emerge on the impact of these tariffs, all right? Oh, and the 2018 tariffs caused steel prices for U.S. firms to rise, putting downstream U.S. manufacturing at a disadvantage. Really? Did that really happen? Higher domestic steel and aluminum prices have adversely affected other U.S. manufacturing industries that depend on steel as an input to production. Interesting. So did that happen? Let's see what Reuters says about what happened the last time Trump put tariffs on steel and aluminum. Remember, the argument is that the prices of steel and aluminum went up, causing domestic manufacturers on products that use steel and aluminum to make goods to pay more for prices. Thus, they have to lose jobs, all right? If prices go up, inputs go up, that means jobs are lost. That's the argument that those guys are making. And let's see what happened here. We're going to scroll to, whoa. Tariff on metals heated up prices right here. March to June 2018, we see in prices going up. But whoa. Then they went way down. So you can see, I think this is price per metric ton. So we got the price per metric ton when the tariffs were imposed went right there and went higher. But then price per metric ton went down by 50% over the next 3 years or so. Huh. And when was this article written? That this guy said right here. Let's take a look. 2020. So EconoFact, because facts still matter, said tariffs caused steel prices to rise. And yet in 2020, when this was written, steel prices were almost 50% lower than they were when the tariffs were initiated. Interesting. Aluminum prices, same thing. That's inconvenient. That's an inconvenient truth, is it not? They're EconoFact with your facts, so that's not a fact. The tariff prices the steel did not go up in price. It just simply did not. So if you're saying you're all about facts, that's incorrect. All right, so let's, right here. Myth number 1 is that we can get rid of that. The tariffs protected jobs, because we just showed you they lost jobs because of tariffs. I wonder if it might have been something to do with something else. I don't know. Just throwing it out there, but certainly wasn't the price of steel and aluminum going up that caused jobs, because the price of steel and aluminum went down. Myth number 2, we need tariffs because America runs trade deficits with other countries. And we know what Stossel is going to say, which is so friggin' embarrassing. We do run deficits. Our trade deficit with China so far this year is more than $70 billion. So what? I run a trade deficit with my supermarket. I give them money. They never give me money. That's fine as freedom. The economy sorts it out, Josh. Don't you know? Don't you know? There's nothing bad about a trade deficit or good about a surplus. I don't necessarily disagree with that. America ran a trade surplus during the Great Depression. Well, we can also say the same thing about deficits as a whole, not just trade deficits, but deficits as a whole, can we not? All right, because we can say we ran a surplus during the Depression. All right, but we run little trade surplus during the Depression. We can use that same logic to say trade surpluses are bad or not necessarily good. We can use the same logic to look at our surplus or a level of debt levels compared to previous economic activity that we had in the United States. So if you have massive debts and massive growth, then inherently debts aren't that big of a deal. If you have massive debts and low growth, then you can say debts might be a bad deal. Or you can say that maybe not a huge correlation. That's my argument. There's not a huge correlation there between debt and growth. But anyway, let's keep going here. Because this whole thing about I run a trade deficit in my supermarket, I give them money, they never give me money. John Stossel, what if your supermarket was the only game in town? What if they monopolized, for instance, the sale of groceries to you, and your supermarket said, hey, if you want to buy our goods, you have to get vaccinated. And you're like, no, it's okay. I run a trade surplus with you, a trade deficit with you. I'll give you my money. So we don't want your money unless you get vaccinated. What are you going to do then, John Stossel? Well, why is that not the same when it comes to steel? China produces more than half of the world's steel right now. We produce 4 to 5% of the world's steel. That's just a fact. China is self-sufficient on steel. We are not. We rely on foreigners. Some of these foreigners are economic enemies. It's just a fact. And yet, your grocery store, while it's not your economic enemy today, it certainly could be if it monopolized, like China is doing, cornering the market on steel. And as such, guess what? Those trade deficits could quickly come back to bite in the bud the minute they say, if you don't do this, you are not getting that loaf of bread. And then what you would say is, I'm going to make my own bread. Hey, that works, does it not? All right, you're not going to trade with me there, country? All right, I'll make my own bread. Hey, it's kind of what we're trying to do with steel. We're going to make our own steel. Hey, crazy. But then someone would still say, yeah, but you still need the flour. Where are you going to get the flour from? Well, if that supermarket is the only game in town when it comes to flour, I'll make my own wheat. Hey, how are you going to grind that wheat into flour? I'll be my own mill. Hey, see how this works? See? You do it yourself so you don't have to rely on those guys with your stupid trade. It's just such a stupid argument. It's just embarrassingly stupid. So what if I run my own trade deficit in my supermarket? I give them money. They don't give me any money. That's just dumb. Then he says, American industrial, right here, myth 3, we need tariffs because global trade hollowed out America's manufacturing base. Well, it did. Youngstown, Ohio, up there in Maine, Millinocket, Maine. I mean, it has, without question. Large and persistent annual U.S. good trade deficits have led to hollowing out of our manufacturing base. It's silly. It's just wrong. American industrial output is near an all-time high. That doesn't mean they haven't hauled out our manufacturing base. Also, just what? This is the best libertarians have? It's embarrassing. Unemployment is now at 4.2%, much lower than when I grew up. Huh? That doesn't mean your manufacturing base hasn't been hauled out. It's the weirdest thing. And then they always say, politicians never learn. In 1930, at the start of what became the Great Depression, we always revert back to Smoot-Hawley, the Tariff Act. It deepened and lessened the Depression. But you know what did not deepen what actually increased the economic output was the Dingley Tariff of 1897. Just a fact. The Dingley Tariff of 1897 was a predecessor to us taking over Britain as the industrial engine of the world. That's just a fact. It's literally just a fact. We grew such higher than UK, than Britain. And Britain still had adherence to free trade. The Fording Tariff in 1922. The U.S. economy boomed because of the Fording Tariff in 1922. Is it because of that? I'm not going to say this. Again, I don't believe correlation necessarily equals causation. But if you're going to keep going back to Smoot-Hawley, I'm going to keep going back to the two other times we have had successful tariffs. I'm not going to get the Morrill Tariff or the McKinley Tariff. Not at all. We don't need to go that far. But if you're going to use Smoot-Hawley in 1930, I'll just throw Fording in 1922 and Dingley in 1897. But even better, I'll throw these guys, these Harvard economists. A tariff growth paradox. Let's take a look at what these guys say. These guys from Harvard show that the highest countries with tariffs, the countries with the highest tariffs actually grew faster than the countries with the lowest tariffs up until about 1950. These two Harvard economists, don't blame me, they say there is no incompatibility between the less well-known positive tariff/growth correlation between 1914 and the very well-known negative tariff growth correlation since 1970. The less well-known positive growth with tariffs up until basically 1950, but the very well-known negative growth with tariffs after World War II. In a larger sense, we find it has not always been true that protected countries with tariffs, finish last, and it need not be true in the future. Interesting. If free trade has been good for growth since World War II, why was it bad for growth before that? About 30 years ago, an economist argued that protectionist countries grew faster in the 19th century, not slower. These guys cite three other economists, and he says, in short, these four scholars were not able to find any evidence before World War I supporting the free trade fosters growth hypothesis. And it gives us some pretty interesting stuff here. In 1905, tariffs in Uruguay, the most protectionist European offshoot, were about 2.5 times those of Canada, the most free trade. In the same year, tariffs in Brazil and Colombia were almost 10 times that of China and India. The same appeared, tariffs in the U.S. were 5 times that of the UK in 1905. So if you want to look at it, say what countries grew more, and I challenge all these stuff with GDP is such a stupid way to look at it, but still, tariffs in the UK were 2.5 times those of Canada. Tariffs in Brazil and Colombia were 10 times those of China and India. And the same tariffs in the UK were 5 times less than what we had in the United States. And the United States was growing much, much quicker than the UK. Anyway, so John Stossel, love you, but I think you can put that in your peace pipe and smoke it. We just debunked John Stossel and the free trade myth. All right, God bless. Love your thoughts. Smash.